Welcome. We're glad you're here. My name is Eric White, and I'm the Adult Services Librarian at the library. As you may know, our February theme here at the library is Won't You Be My Neighbor? And this year is also Colorado's 150th anniversary. In honor of both those things, and in partnership with the Estes Park Museum, we are excited to have Alexandra Maeck with us to discuss her grandfather, W.S. Cooper, a long ago Estes Valley neighbor. Alexandra will share some stories and photos and then take your questions. After that, Mikaela Fundaun, Curator of Interpretation at the Estes Park Museum, will discuss how to access the museum's resources to learn more about all the stories and characters that Alexandra mentioned in her presentation. So before I introduce Alexandra, I'll just mention my usual disclaimer, which is that the library brings in amazing speakers to share their perspectives for the enrichment of our community, and speakers' perspectives are purely their own. All right, now I would like to introduce our guest. Alexandra Maeck was born and raised in Connecticut, but spent her summers in the Rocky Mountains, staying in the cabin her grandfather built on what was once Joe Mills' homestead. After graduating from Dartmouth and Columbia, she moved west, becoming an English professor at Los Angeles City College and a mother of two who are wiser than she ever was. Now retired, she enjoys sharing her grandfather's insights into nature and challenging her hips and knees on hikes and climbs. So I will call Alexandra up here in just a second. Let me get her presentation all queued up here so that our online audience can see it. So give me just one moment to do that. All right, there we go. Please welcome Alexandra Maeck.
Thank you. Before I begin, I want to say, Grandpa, I know you wouldn't give the talk I'm about to give, but I hope I do you justice and I don't get it too wrong. Grandpa, and to my family who isn't here, I just want you to know I feel you. I've been feeling you all day. So now I will begin. I am Alexandra Maeck, and I thank you for coming when it's barely snowing. And I first want the world to know how, if you already know, but how wonderful the Estes Park Library is because of so much that it offers to the community. It's year-round, inspiring, engaging, enriching programming. And I want to thank the program coordinator, Eric White, because he's really good at organizing events. And he's a pleasure to correspond with. He's cheerful, helpful. He edits really well. And he accepted my proposal. So here I am. But I would not be here except for another remarkable person, Dr. John Locker. And he found me 6 years ago, and this is a doctor, mountain climber, bookmaker, and he's another one of those people who makes things happen, and he found Mountains, a memoir that my grandfather wrote and published in 1971. And because John Locker seeks out, good books by good writers about mountain climbs, he found us, and with the family's gratitude, he reprinted this book, which is the primary source of this lecture. And if anyone here is inspired, go over to McDonald's and you can pick up a copy. And if they sell out, you can email John, and I have his email address, which I can give to interested parties at the end of tonight. John is right here. This is really, I would not be here, and this would not be here. The reprint of my grandfather's memoir. Yeah, and he took care to make it look exactly like the original, it's, typewriter font, and it's exactly as my grandfather had written it. And it's just wonderful. Thank you. So tonight, I will focus on the happiest years of my grandfather's life, between 1904, when he first came to Estes Park, and he fell in love with Long's Peak, and then 1910. I'll stop there, and I'll tell you why. He climbed, explored, and mapped this area with the locals whose reputations live on. But the photographs that you will see tonight have never been seen before, ever. So this is a world premiere. They were stored in a shed, near Twins Peak. So, okay, but now here's where I hope this works. This talk is not only about his mountain adventures. It is also about how someone born in 1884 became an ecologist, because you see, ecology did not exist then. It came into being along with other major paradigm shifts transforming this country at the turn of the century. So to explain these shifts, I'm going to present two evolutionary streams, that of certain immigrants who came west and that of certain botanists who came west too. And both evolutions caused people, or Americans, to rethink their relationships to nature, and both streams lead to my grandfather. So if we go back 9 or 10 generations, and how money made its way in and out of the early immigrant families in complex and unpredictable ways, I realized I could not explain my grandfather without reflecting on a cultural story that was evolving long before he was born. So I hope to show you tonight how my grandfather evolved a way of seeing from that. So I hope I do this quickly and clearly and not too slowly, because I'll run out of time. Now let's see. Next slide. It's this button, right? Yeah. You don't have to look at the details. You probably can't even see them. But the basic idea is that, in the 1690s, a Scot guy landed in New England, and then you just see the history, the generation, the generation, the generation. I'm going to talk a little bit about some interesting one leading up to 1884, and that's one stream that I want to briefly review. Why? Because of the ways in which the generations before understood their relationship to nature and how that changed. And then we have the other westward flow. It's coming, I think. This one? This one. Come on, let's go. There we go. We won't go into this in detail, although we could. But, of course, there were European botanists, and I'm going to quote one of them. But as they came to this country, the ideas about what is a botanist over a generation or so became what is an ecologist. And I will say this, my grandfather was not the first. He was not the most famous ecologist. He was part of the stream. He was part of it. And so that, I think, is part of how we understand his work too. And we'll go into that in a little bit detail. But I'm going to start with the first of the Scots, just to give you an idea what it was like. I, Solomon Maeck, was born in 1735 from various misfortunes and the more complicated evils attendant upon the depravity of the sons of men. When I was 4 years old, I was bound out to a farmer. I was considered as a slave, treated by my master as his property. And I didn't realize that this was these indentured servants, 4-year-old children was going on at the time. And then we're going to jump to his son. I'm going to try different things, Eric, but maybe I just hit next. I'm going to hit next. So as we move along, and I'll try to do this quickly, we go from Solomon down to this. This is the guy we're interested in because it's his daughter who married a Cooper who led to the ecologist who is my grandfather. But of some interest is that one of Solomon, that indentured 4-year-old boy, one of his children was Lucy. She married Joseph Smith, and their son was Joseph Smith Jr., the guy who had these tablets in the field and was kicked, rushed out. And he headed west too, but he was chased by a mob. And that was one of the people in the family. And the other one was this guy. I won't go into him, but he went further west. He like his father was a fur trapper, and then I guess I skipped over this part. He also bought land that had been made available because the native tribes had been pushed out, and became wealthy. This guy, the one we're interested in, this Stephen Mack, was very enterprising. He was trapping furs, then he was trading furs, then he had a very lucrative fur trading business. And then he was there just before the thousands of veterans from the Revolutionary War came west, and he got the land from the government that had been taken from the natives and bought it cheap, sold it dear, and that is how wealth came into the family. And so my point was that a massive amount of wealth was generated from the dispossessing of natives, and that is how wealth entered the family and lasted 2 generations. So that's the daughter of Stephen Mack, who married David Cooper, a poor Scottish immigrant, and they had a son, David Mack Cooper, and there's father and son there. Now, there's money, right? And so this son went to Princeton to get his licensure and became a Presbyterian minister. Why? He came back to Michigan to bring Christianity to the wilderness. We don't need to see that again. And this is what he wrote about his role as he saw it. And I don't mean to belabor this, but I want you to get the headset of the generations that preceded my grandfather. So he comes back to the wilderness. Saginaw City was on the extreme verge of civilization. In wintertime, the mail was conveyed by Indians on dog-trained sledges. And while I did find some heathen whose heathen proclivities I will not stop to detail, I found also a godly seed. The pioneers of Saginaw Valley found a wilderness, but they made the desert to rejoice and blossom as the rose. So this is like the headset or the lens through which they understood their destiny and their, what they were going to do with nature when they got there, and it led to the wealth. This guy, my grandfather's father, built a great big house, and inside the great big house was every kind of Victorian accoutrement that you could imagine, along with the servants. And he also built that's him and his wife, Carolyn Skinner, who is a pianist. And he built a great big church. And I don't know if we should take the time, but the mother of my grandfather did teach in Sunday school, as a people, we have not been very kind to the Indians. The best we can do for the few that are left is to give them the gospel, which has made us better than they. For we must not forget that our forefathers were savages too. And if it is the grand book which has made us what we are today. So there was, whatever. Okay, this is my grandfather. This is the world he was born into. It is the world he absorbed. And it is also, as I hope we will see, a world that he somewhat changed. Now, he was already a botanist before he went to college. His mother gave him Asa Gray's Manual of Botany. Asa Gray was a very influential botanist of the early 1800s, and my grandfather was hooked. There are other reasons, but he was soon collecting insects and plants. And this is just a sample, but he was painting and drawing and fascinated by patterns and recurring patterns as an early child. And I think that's part of maybe a botanist's fascination with form. Oh, that's just a picture. They would go on vacations and he would collect insects. And he wrote, soon the herbarium idea absorbed me, and I purchased presses and blotters and began to gather specimens in enormous quantity. And then he had to do the pressing and the changing of the dryers, which kept me working until midnight. And mother, in order to get me to bed in a reasonable time, devoted many hours to assisting in this labor. So he was really deeply interested in botany. And now I'm going to do something arbitrary and maybe not effective. I'm going to take the two streams, the family stream and the evolution of botany, and put them at a point where the streams converge, which is the 1893 Chicago World's Columbian Exposition. It was a massive thing. It was called the White City because it was painted white. And who was there? Frederick Jackson, the International Botanical Congress, and it just so happened there was a dispute going on at that point between the continental nomenclature of plants and the American one. So the Americans, well, I can get to that in a minute. And my grandfather was there. He was 9 years old. He drew pictures of it. And the reason I bring this together is that two theories, one famous at the time, promoted by a botanist named Frederick E. Clemens, who later hired Grandpa in 1915 to be a professor. But he was very famous then for a theory he had about succession, and Frederick Jackson Turner. Now, you may have heard of the frontier thesis. And the reason I bring it to our attention is that this idea, it was like the zeitgeist. It was just in their heads. It's how they saw themselves as the pioneers, as you've seen already. So the interesting thing is that the basis of the Frederick Jackson frontier thesis is the same as the basis of the botanist's theory of plant succession. There are stages, and they are predictable, and they lead to a predictable outcome. And in the case of the American character, it was created by the meeting at the frontier, where the wilderness, and he spelled it out. First you get the frontier, and then the pioneer comes in, and then the immigrants come in, and they build their little churches and schools, and then another wave of capitalists and enterprise, and the cities are coming. And this is what forged that unique American, inventive, energetic American character. And this is 400 years since, Columbus came, and it all comes together here at the exposition. And that was, of course, a theory that fit very well with kind of ideas about who are Americans and what is our destiny. And so these are his own words. And I don't mean to dwell on it because I'm running out of time, but the inventive, the practical, the energy, the individualism, the freedom. But, what happens, when there's no more frontier? That's what Turner was kind of worried about. Okay, we don't have to spend time here because I'm taking too long. The words Turner used are the words my own ancestors used. It's exactly the same. Oh, these are men of enterprise. These are men of, ingenuity and energy, and they knew that. So we don't have to read them all. But what amazes me is that, when there's like a prevailing dominant theory that explains who we are, where we come from, and where we're going, it gets in everybody's head, and it was in their heads. And we don't need to look at that. I only mention this because it will change. And that's where my grandfather comes in. So this is the plant succession idea. And again, remember, this is the guy who was my grandfather's boss. And my grandfather actually went on to disagree. The interesting thing about it is just like this will happen everywhere, and it will inevitably lead to a conclusion. That plants will successively replace each other until they reach a stable climax. the climax forest, and it's there. It's like an embryonic DNA germ inherent in all forms. And so he has established a pattern that can be universally applied about plant succession. All right, so let's get to my grandfather. Let's get to my grandfather. Can we get to my grandfather? Let's try hitting it again. Ah, no, we don't want to see. Again, I'm just re-emphasizing to show you this again, is that the botanists are also heading west. And what happened as part of this change, they're going outdoors. So, Carl Linnaeus, he took his plant and he brought it inside and he looked at it and he figured out, counting the leaves, and he gave it a name and in a system of classification. But what these guys are doing now, that's part of this transformation, is they don't look at the plant. They go outside and they look at the plant in the field and they look at where it's growing and whether it's growing by a stream or up on a ridge. And it's becoming dynamic. So the whole way of studying the plant itself has to involve time and change. And so this is the transformation in how the botanist is starting to think like an ecologist. That's Frederick Clements out there in the field. My grandfather was with many of their Western trips, and they'd go out and there are various nuclei of research centers. I shouldn't spend time on this, but it was Alexander von Humboldt back in Europe who started, he was a genius. He had, physical and intellectual energy. But this is the beginning of the dynamic where he begins to see it's not just a tree, it's a tree interacting with climate, and there's something back and forth about the way they interrelate. And that's the beginning of sort of a different way of understanding. So in 1904, by now, my grandfather is 20, he started college, and he convinces his parents who love to travel. They come to Estes, they go to Denver, they stay at the Brown? Yeah, thank you. They go to Boulder, they get to pick up the stage in Lyons, and I won't quote what his father said. They become, it is Joe Mills, that's Joe Mills, and not Enos, with whom my grandfather becomes real friends with. And Joe Mills is there with, that dog is a major character in many of the books that Enos and Joe wrote, and in an adventure we shall soon read about. And so there's Joe Mill, 1904, packing up to Cabin Rock. He had a homestead on the side of Twins facing Longs, and he brought his wife Ethel there. He eventually let it go. He did not stay, and my grandfather bought the homestead. So we now have most of that left. This is my favorite picture. I love this picture. And that's Joe Mills. And don't encourage your children to do this. But what I love is this bear here. Yeah, and now this is Scotch, Enos's dog, and that's Joe Mills. And Joe Mills was a very endearing person. Not everyone will say that about his brother. And so my grandfather comes out, and there's a quote here somehow. I've completely lost my track, but he was so eager. He was so happy when he came out here. And this horse he is riding is his friend too. And we will be seeing Tip in many photos and many accounts. He starts his book, his memoir, from earliest childhood, I loved mountains. All my life through, mountains and music have been my chief joys. And so when they get up here in 1904, he eagerly took off on the 12-mile horseback ride. This is the horse loaned to my grandfather by Enos, because of course Enos is up there managing the Longs Peak Inn. So, there's a lot of language. I won't quote it because I'm running too long, about his mountain climbs. They're wonderful. But just so you get a picture, they end their trip with it by going to Pikes Peak, and that's mom and dad, and um, on the top of Pikes Peak. 2 years later, he returns. By now, he has graduated, and he's a grad student he starts out at Johns Hopkins University. We can talk more about his education. Okay, I will. Briefly, as an undergraduate at Alma College, which is a college his father started, he does meet Dr. Transeau, who inspired him. And he writes, I'm not doing my notes now, this was the man who influenced his life because he was an ecologist, and it just took off. So he's getting, I guess my point is this, that my grandfather is right there, like in the wave, like in this thing that is happening. These ecologists all know each other. They're at meetings. They don't always agree. One's up in Alaska, one's down in, the Amazon, another is in Tucson, but it's happening. And so my grandfather was fortunate because his undergraduate botany teacher was a very close friend. And you know that my grandfather's head now is thinking seriously when he comes out. Now, it looks like he's here just to have fun, and he is. I mean, he is. Now, because I just flew in and took, that trip from Denver to Boulder and Boulder to Estes, well, we all know it's changed. And so this is the view from Denver of Long's Peak. This is, from Boulder to Lyons. There are not a lot of houses. And then this is the stagecoach still coming up. It was a slightly different route up till Pinewood. And then I think they followed the same route into Estes. And then this is Lyons. And they get their rooms at the Elk. Yeah, it just slipped out of mind. Well, we lost her, and that's mom. She sets up, and this is what the women did. Yeah, have fun, mom. And then not all the women, as you'll see. And Enos, was a busy guy, but often he was at Long's Peak Inn, and often he was out doing whatever, whatever Enos did. But that's Enos. And my grandfather just couldn't wait, to get up from Estes to the Long's Peak Inn, and this is the road. And this is the Long's Peak Inn. And his own notes say the inn before completion, but it was, I believe, completed by 1906. And then maybe it was the fire. I think there had been a fire and some buildings damaged. So there's construction, but this is the Long's Peak Inn that was built by Parson Lambs, and then Enos bought it, and then Enos runs it now. And it's just before the tourism industry really begins to pick up, like in the next, I guess, 10 years. So there it is, Long's Peak Inn as it looked in 1906. This is the cabin, the cottage, the forest cottage where my grandfather stayed. Yeah, I know, it's big. And this is the interior, and this is, I guess, the exterior, and this is, I guess my point in bringing this in, things were different. There were beaver, and there were many, beaver dams and beaver trees. Another difference is really, you look at the photos from May to June, and then he was there in August and September too. There was a lot more snow. And this is Jim's Grove. It's just uncanny. The world was just full of snow. So he had a couple of special moments in 1906, and I just want to briefly touch upon them. He said, August 18th, exploring Upper Glacier Gorge via Keyhole while crossing a snowbank, I kicked half the sole off one shoe, which made the remainder of the day very uncomfortable. I do have a picture of this, but not tonight. I took the Moffat road trip to Arrow, and returning to Estes, I found Tip waiting for me at the post office. He loved Tip. And now comes something of kind of a funny story. That, I'm afraid, John, might be from Pigeon Peak. I'm not sure, but it's kind of cool. Yeah, that might be the wrong mountain for this moment, but that's the guy. Um, so he had his first experience as a guide with Margaret True of Denver, my girlfriend from the period. It was a very enjoyable chirp he wrote, though very slow. Now, that is not Margaret, but I put this in because of what they wore when they went, they just went climbing up longs. I mean, can you imagine wearing that? And, when it rains, they get wet and it's heavy. And there's no Velcro, no Pertex, no down, no sunscreen. And here is Margaret. Can you imagine that? Yeah, and she made it. Uh, and this is the kind of, can you imagine wearing those clothes up there? And she writes him later. Oh no, this is funny. They're making fun of themselves. That's just silly. They're not on top of a mountain. I think they're on top of rocks. But but this is Margaret when she goes back to Denver, and I don't know if you can read it. Thanks for the snapshot, but really I am not half as frightened as I look. When do you go through Denver? And then her cartoon. So I thought that was kind of charming. And that's the girlfriend of the time. I think he tried to name a mountain after her, but the name didn't stick. Now, since this is at Long's Peak Inn, and that is my grandfather. I don't know who these people are. So if some of you know everybody who was there in 1906, you can maybe help me out. But this is them. This is the masked ball. This is Charlie Hughes. And Charlie Hughes built the Hughes Kirkwood Inn just where the current music, Rocky Mountain Music School, Rocky Ridge he built that inn. And I don't know, this is Howard. Maybe you know who Howard is. And this is Gus and Alvy in the mask ball. So they were very serious guys, you can see. And this is not the greatest quality photo, but Howard in full bloom. So this photo shows my grandfather, William S. Cooper, with John Hubbard. And they did many climbs together in 1906 and 1908. And later, 1920, John Hubbard accompanied my grandfather when he went to Glacier Bay. So John Hubbard was a friend and a climbing companion. In fact, when they first climbed longs this summer, and my grandfather writes, in his memoir how the sun comes up and it's beautiful, it's dawn, and John Hubbard's comment, "Damn," So that's John Hubbard. I think they're at the inn there, and I'm going to use this photo, although it's not exactly, and I don't want to take too long because I really have to stop soon. There was a rescue. My grandfather was part of a rescue that Joe Mills was on of a Miss Browne, I guess, from Denver. And she wanted to climb by herself. And everybody said, no, don't do that. But she persisted. So Enos Mills said, okay, and this is quoting, to Miss Broham, Scotch knows the way. This is Enos. He is to be your guide. And to Scotch, whatever happens, do not leave the lady. Now, this is from the memoir. At 6, she had not returned. So Joe Mills and 2 workmen started up the trail. They returned at midnight, having failed to find her or her horse. One of the men was exhausted. I was up, as usual, pressing plants. And Joe, Carl, and I started up the trail. Not far below timberline, we met Miss Brougham's horse, riderless. Above timberline, we met head-on wind of hurricane force. My horse constantly staggered several times. A heavy gust forced him from the trail. We fastened the horses at the usual spot on Granite Pass. Attempts to light a lantern failed. We stumbled across boulder field to discover clues. We spent the next hours not far below Keyhole in a niche between the rocks to accommodate 3 men tightly packed. For 3 hours, we engaged in competitive shivering, very glad to regenerate the warmth of our bodies as we resumed the search. We traversed the ledges to the trough, and then he went up, and he heard there was a shout. We found Miss B hugging Scotch, thoroughly chilled. We were welcomed by a nonchalant "good morning." And then my grandfather did not approve of this woman because this is how he analyzes what happened. In their descent, Scotch made the correct turn to cross the ledges, but Miss B disagreed. The turnoff was farther down, she told Scotch, disobeying Mills' instructions. Scotch persisted on showing her the error, but finally gave up, thus faithfully carrying out the orders given by his master. And as darkness came on, she realized she was hopelessly lost, and that terrible wind arose, and she was on the windward side of the ridge, while on the other side lay shivering 3 would-be rescuers. So here's the problem. They give her whiskey, they bring her down, and as soon as she's able, she sends her version to a Chicago paper where it is reprinted 4 times. My grandfather writes, Miss B stated she reached the summit. She did not. The picture she took of the summit was at the beginning of the Narrows. So that's that story. By the way, Joe Mills also describes this in his Mountain Boyhood book, but he's much kinder to her. My grandfather is not. So between summers, I just want you to quickly know that there's a transformation going on in my grandfather's head. When he returns to graduate school, he becomes interested in geology. He studies under, this is more of me trying to show a graphic illustration of how the people and the professors and the scientists are influencing his own developing fluency as an ecologist to explain and describe nature. Let's not look at this, but these are his professors, some of them very well known. In 1908, my grandfather actually published an article about, excuse me, I'm not following my script at all. Alpine vegetation in the vicinity of Longs Peak, Colorado. And this was published in the Botanical Gazette in 1908. I should have a copy, but I don't. This isn't a very interesting slide, but what is interesting is that in order to, and this is what, all those fun mountain climbs and adventures, he's collecting and pressing plants, and he's taking, a lot of these photographs are not just because they're pretty, but because they help to understand the relationships over time between ice, rock, and plant succession. And so in order for him to explain the flora, he has to go back, 1.8 million years to the Pleistocene, and then the glaciations that advanced and retreated, and then as the glaciers retreated in the last 15,000 years, how the plants came in, the rocks cracked and crumbled, the whole geology over thousands of years in order to understand the succession of plants as we see them today. And so this is an early paper, and yet you can see how, to understand when you look at like flora, it becomes very complicated indeed, and you almost have to narrow down what you want to focus on. So he gives us a plant succession as he discovered it. But this is something you would never be able to write if you're publishing a scientific paper today. He loved these, at Timberline, the Krummholz. But where is my quote? Perhaps I shouldn't. He writes with such affection and drama of these trees that it's something you never get away with today. So I'm sorry I don't have the words, but I love the photos. And who doesn't love looking at them up there at Timberline? Now, there are more climbs with John Hubbard and Tip and Pat. And you know what? In 1908, because I'm running out of time, I cannot go into detail. But the major event in this year is that he goes into Wild Basin and creates the first map. Now, he had never made a map before. And so it's kind of amazing that he was able to do it. He packs on the back of the bureau the rudiments. He said he had learned of plane table mapping, maximum minimum thermometers, atymometers, a small plane table, an alidade, and various other plane tripod, plant press, sleeping bags, and all of this is carried by Pat. So these are just a few photos. I have to kind of hurry it up. They're setting out now. I believe this is Elkhorn Lodge. That's Charlie Hughes. That's Pat. And they do a lot of climbing and exploring. And I show you this photo because he named a lot of the features in Wild Basin. So these are the names that are with us today. Ouzel Peak, Meadow Mountain, Pine Ridge, Bluebird Lake, Junco Lake, Pipit Lake, Chickadee Pond, Calypso Cascades, Mertensia Falls, Columbine Falls are all names that he gave to Wild Basin features. The names that did not last are named after his mother, Mount Caroline, which is now Elk's Tooth, which I believe is what you see in the foreground there in the middle of the page. Mount Clarence King is now Mount Copeland. If you know Clarence King, he was a very famous geologist and famous naturalist. And then the peak for his father is now Ogallala Peak. Okay, so we got to move it along, folks, because I'm running out of time. Just the map making in that time. And if you're interested, after this presentation, this is the map. It's one of the original. There are not many printed. I'll open it up at the end of the presentation, and you can show you map of Long's Peak printed in 1911. This is my mother's copy, and I can show it to you at the end. All right. Grandpa. Now, I just have to, oh, that's Charlie Hughes sliding. They like to play around to it. Okay, climbing in those days. They just, anyway. Come on, let's go. I can't read this all, but Charlie Hughes wrote some really cool things about my grandfather. And this is from, I'm sorry, I went ahead, now I want to go back. They're kind of cool descriptions about my grandfather. A swift walker, tireless and persistent, one of the most agreeable personalities, indulging in drollery and levity, and how he would just go off if he saw a specimen, and I would dog his footsteps as he pursued with all the ardor of an enthusiast the various botanical treasures. So unfortunately, because of time, I cannot read this all to you, but it gives you an idea of something that just happens when you're really happy. It doesn't bother you that the half of your soul fell off and you're still up on Long's Peak. You're just given to what you love doing. And they come back after about 10 days looking just a little worse for the wear at the end of the Wild Trip Basin, but we have the map to thank for it. And I just have to touch on a few more. This is leaving now. We're not on horses anymore. What's happens, this is the end of 1908. And I'm about at the end of his adventures because it is still in 1908. At the end of the summer, it gets, even in the memoir, just a bit wistful because he climbs Richtofen with Tip. And it's a long trip just to get to the base of the mountain. And he loves, I will read you his descriptions of Tip because he loves that horse. And he often says, I'm so happy, I'm all alone. No, not alone. Tip is here. you know, and so, oh, I'm skipping some really good stories about when he was in a storm and he and John Hubbard on top of a rock, and the lightning, his hair is standing on end, and there's electricity coming out of his finger. Anyway, this is the trip to Mount Richthofen, and I'll just read little bits if you don't mind. They get there, it's raining and it's very wet, and Tip is scrambling all over on the rocks. But later one night, my grandfather writes, I lingered for a full hour feasting on wild strawberries, in which occupation, to my scientific delight, I found 2 specimens of Broctimian lunaris. Tip munched his oats, oblivious of the rain. Very soon I picketed Tip in a good locality for feed, and put an armful of branches on the fire, crawled into my bag alone in the forest and happy. No, not alone. Tip was with me. And so the next day he tethers Tip, he climbs the mountain, and it's a very long climb. And he finally gets back, to get back, he just goes, he has to go up and down. He finally gets back to Tip. Tip had gotten the rope wedged between the hoof and shoe of one of his hind feet, and the length of rope between head and feet, and was so short that he could not put his foot on the ground, but was standing on 3 legs patiently waiting for my return. Poor Tip. I wonder how long he had been standing on 3 legs. And there is a beautiful picture of Tip that I don't have, but I'm going to, now I'm going to read you, no, I want to go back. Tip has a very evident appreciation of his own skill as a rock climber. He will choose the rockiest part of the road or trail, steep places preferred, and will slide down smooth rocks and step off high ones when such proceedings are entirely unnecessary. His desire to do stunts and my desire to be on the safe side often lead us into disagreement. Tip's most obvious idiosyncrasy is his grunt. He grunts now and then in all situations, but employs his power, especially when going downhill. Sometimes the grunts come in short, detached order, sometimes one long, continuous groan. It is wonderful how long he can sustain the tone without taking a breath. Tip's grunt is always laughable and never loses its novelty. Many other peculiarities has Tip, all interesting and amusing and lovable, like the horse himself. And when the trip was over, he writes, the wettest trip in my experience, and perhaps the happiest, possibly because for company I had only my friend Tip. So a few days later, after this climb, he is in Wild Basin with Dean Babcock, a local and wonderful artist, and Tip in Wild Basin. At the end of a good dinner, they hear a shot. Enos Mills comes galloping in to inform my grandfather that his father was dangerously ill. So he writes, my grandfather, we arose at dawn and Tip and I started on our last ride together. At the inn, I bade almost a tearful farewell to my friend on so many happy expeditions. So he takes the train, to Denver, to Chicago, to Detroit, and the train felt very slow and he arrived too late. So he writes in this memoir, oh, I'm going way over. Oh my goodness, I'm almost done. So I just have to say this. I conclude this account with a tribute to my mother and father. For 2 summers, they permitted me to spend several months absolutely on my own in the wilds of the Rockies, grudging nothing in the way of expense. They believed that what I was doing was worth doing and seemed proud of my adventures. Some of these adventures caused them to worry as to my safety, but they never acknowledged this until the danger was past. For their confidence and support, I am deeply grateful. So I just have one last thing. I apologize. I read too many quotes. There's Tip. I just wanted to show you some photographs. I have not done justice to his metaphor for explaining evolution, which is the braided stream. It's more complex than I can tell you right now because the braided stream has tributaries, and it's a way of metaphorically describing change over time, even when chance, we always wonder, is it chaotic in nature or is it following a pattern? And his metaphor allows for both over time. And it's so much different from Clemens's stream. But when he gets back to graduate school after his father's death, he has a heart incident. And the doctor has there. It was at a dinner. He's okay. But the doctor, it's the end of his mountain climbing. And he still goes on adventures, but he's not climbing mountains. And his turn to academia follows. But his photographs, I felt when I look at them, I began to see the way he did. My mother complained when he took out the tripod and he took forever to take a photograph, and everybody went crazy. But he composes them carefully, sometimes for the scientific interest, sometimes to show the relationships between rock, water, ice, tree, plant, light, vapor, cloud. But they're very, very beautiful. Here, it's not just one contour, which is the sky, but another contour, which is the water meeting the land, and reflections. He's fascinated with mirror reflections, the repeating masses into the distance. And we'll just have to breeze through these. He loved clouds. Come on. He loved reflection. Hurry up. Okay, we don't have to pause on these. These are, I'm so sorry. He loved water, the relationships of, but there's one we have to see. Oh yeah, this is glaciation and plant. Okay, and whoops, come on. So it's not always so serious, and I have to stop. But the photographs, I really feel when I look at them carefully, they are trying to capture the stream of life as it adjusts to constant change being the premise of the ecological perspective. That's actually Alaska. That's Alaska. Sorry. He was one of the first people to use aerial photography. So it's his own language, a fluent mode of thought for fluent truth. And I just had this thought, if he could see today, what has happened, I do not think my grandfather could bear it, but then how can we? So I'm done. I apologize. I really badly timed this. Thank you so much. Thank you. Grandpa. Okay, so Eric, you just tell me what to do. I mean, I know it's Q&A and I'm happy to take questions, but I don't want to take time away from our next presenter.
All right, we are in Q&A land. I'll call on in-person attendees and I'll alternate with our online audience. In-person friends, please wait for me to get to you with the mic before saying your question. And online folks, as a reminder, you can put your questions in the chat. I'm actually going to start with a question from our online audience. Carol asks, it would seem that the young lady you mentioned, Margaret L. True, is a sister to artist Alan Tupper True. Is that correct?
Wow.
Is it true?
I don't know. This is news to me. I would love to find out. What is this person's name?
That was a question from Carol.
Carol, let's find out. I will definitely try to research this and come up with an answer. I have no idea.
Oh, who's got a question?
How old was your grandpa when he was diagnosed with the heart deal?
About 22. And listen, I asked my friend, Dr. John Locker, who thought these days that would not have stopped a person from mountain climbing. I mean, he had irregular heartbeat and some kind of, maybe something happened. He had to lie down. They gave him nitroglycerin. And in those days, they told him, the first thing my grandfather asked, can I climb mountains? And he was advised in moderation. But after that, he continued doing studies in Mexico, Alaska, Florida, the Grand Isle and Lake Superior, but he didn't climb mountains, and he was only 22. So I don't know, Dr. Locker, I don't know if I misrepresent what you said, but.
Oh, hang on, let me get to you with the mic.
Physicians at that time didn't have very many effective bullets. And basically, if somebody had a heart problem, they looked at it as a downhill slope and just didn't want to mess with that. So they often made advice like that. I had the same thing happen in my life. I was told not to go above 8,000 feet for a number of years because I had an irregular heartbeat. And it happens. Does it make a bit of difference? Probably not. You should always try to use a little good judgment.
Thank you.
I'm just in awe of all these photographs. This is a time and era when a lot of your photography was wet placed, and they're moving over to dry plate process, carrying all those chemicals and all that equipment and taking all these photographs is beyond belief for me. It's just miraculous.
I'm so glad you made that point. Yeah, and the water, there are many photographs of water falling, waves crashing, and they're not blurry. I don't know how they did that. And, all this equipment, they're carrying on their backs or on the back of the burro. I'm so glad you pointed that out. Oh, I'm really glad that point has been made.
Other questions?
Did your grandfather ever come back here, and how did your father and then your mother start to come here?
My grandfather bought 140 acres, 160 acres homestead, and we've kept it. So he built a cabin in 1940. My childhood memories, and I speak for my sister and brother, are enchanted by our memories of having been to the cabin with our grandparents. When he died in 1978, he left half of the property in the cabin to my uncle and the other half to my mother. The uncle sold the cabin and the half to Hank Glover, who was the owner of Twisted Pine, and he's been a wonderful neighbor. So, but it's not our cabin. But what we do have is land still. So it stayed in the family, pretty much. Pretty good. Not perfect, but yeah. Did I answer your question? It was my mother always took us here as children. We came to visit. So I remember my grandfather and my grandmother and the cabin. He wrote a lot. He would read his stories in front of the fire. It was completely magical. And so we still come back, of course. And I thank you. I hope I answered your question.
Any other questions?
We all recognize Gem Lake. Yeah, Gem Lake up there.
Oh, Gem Lake. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was just such a different world. It was such a different world. I felt very nostalgic putting this together, but it's a world that has disappeared. And now we have our world, and ecologists are still trying to figure out our relationship to nature and what's going. We think of ecology now, and I'm talking too much, but we think of the human disturbing the natural equilibrium. And, now what? I yield the floor. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure and an honor, Grandpa. Oh, yeah.
All right. Alexandra, thank you so much. Now I would like to introduce Mikaela Fundaun, Curator of Interpretation for the Estes Park Museum, to talk about the museum's local history resources. So let me just do a little zoom adjustment here. Put some stuff up on the screen. Let's see. Give me 1 minute. Here we go. And let me just make sure we're sharing. All right, please welcome Mikaela.
All right, can everyone hear me? Okay, perfect. I see a few familiar faces in the audience. As many of you know, my name is Mikaela. Like Eric said, I am the Curator of Interpretation at the Estes Park Museum. That means I do exhibits and programming. I'm going to speak very briefly about some museum resources that we have that you guys can utilize at home to do research into your grandfather, your grandmother, your neighbors, and things like that. So very briefly, we're going to start with the museum's website. It's the best place to start. We encourage folks to do their own research. We are a small but mighty staff at the museum, but we cannot do everyone's genealogy for them, unfortunately. So this is a great place to start. So if you scroll down these beautiful, below these beautiful panoramas, you'll see a couple of things that I want to draw your eye to. Most notably, right here, the Museum Collections and Research tab. So I'm going to highlight a couple of things on this page because we don't have time to go through them all. But I want to draw your attention. The top research tab is the museum's collection. Here we have about 35,000 objects in the museum's collection, and that is everything from historic photographs, maps, and things like that to bathtubs, to Steinway pianos. We have quite the gambit at the museum. Additionally, the historic newspaper collection, in conjunction with the Estes Valley Library, we are digitizing the Trail Gazette, and that's been digitized from 1921, and now we're up to 2004. So if you would like to start searching for your own name, go for it. And then ideally, we will be up to present very soon. All of those are also being scanned in full color, so you get the closest facsimile of that newspaper, which is pretty exciting. Again, historic photographs, and then the oral history collection. There are a couple of things down here that I'll just mention. Town of Estes Park Records portal. If you would like to donate, this is how you contact our curator of collections. And then folks who are interested in local history, we do have digital publications available from our town historian laureate, Dr. Pickering. And those are in Kindle and PDF format too, if you would like to read them. They are completely free. So I want to go up here, and this is kind of a little audience participation. So this is where we host our museum collection. So we're just going to go up here. These are keyword searchable. So can someone give me a term to search? Wild Basin. Thank you, Sybil. Oops. Okay, so this is going to pull up 204 results. things from the museum collection, items from the museum collections. Here's just a water basin, so it's going to pull those keywords. So we've got scrapbooks, greeting cards, postcards, this lantern slide. Some of them have photographs, some of them do not. We have a lot of lantern slides, it looks like. Here's Glacier Basin. You can pull that up. And then it'll have the museum catalog information and things like that below. So this is dated to 1920. And I will tell you, this turns into a rabbit hole very quickly. All right, so obviously we're not going to go through 204 results, but thank you, Sybil, for your suggestion. So if we go back, we can go, the next thing I want to pull up very quickly again is the oral history collection. This is a great resource, and we are always continuing to add to it every year. I'm going to play the snippet, maybe many of you have seen this, but it's some of the snippets we have. So if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page, we have about 45 recordings posted. Some of these date from the late 1960s, like I said, up until present, as we are still currently collecting. And you can hear the audio transcript or listen to the audio as well as follow along with a transcript that has been created for that recording. So I'm just going to pull this up. Eric, I think this will work.
We do this to remind one another of our shared humanity, to strengthen and build the connections between people, to teach the value of listening, and to weave into the fabric of our culture the understanding that everyone's story matters. At the same time, we are creating an invaluable archive for future generations.
I'm a Colorado boy, and I came to Estes Park in 1931. Of course, I was in the grocery business.
Well, as I guess you all know by this time, I came here in 1900. It's quite a while ago. If you're good at arithmetic, you can probably figure that out.
I came up in 1914 to play at the picture show, Park Theater, for the Silent Moons, the first year it was built.
First place I ever worked in Estes Park, I helped build the Craig's Hotel in the winter of 1919 and 1920.
In any case, you came right by my place. You remember, right after the stoplight, people always seem to remember Casey and his little train.
I came here because I was a hard Indian looking for a job, and I was very poor. When I arrived, I had 4 pennies in my pocket.
I knew, of course, Enos Mills and his brother Joe and Abner Sprague and J.D. Stead and all the other big shots because, as I say, everybody knew everybody else. You knew their saddle horse and their dog, and we were more of a family, kind of a case of one for all and all for the one.
Is there anything else you remember about the Stanleys and visiting them?
Mrs. Stanley and my mother were pretty good friends, and I remember her.
McGregor's, I did know Muriel and her parents, Maud and Donald.
I got to work for the incredible and famous Billy Westbay.
Still miss the horses. The place used to crawl with horses. Marvelous. Probably more horses than people in here in the summer almost.
We would walk down and they were very gracious. They were always very welcoming. Donald was usually out in the fields, very busy.
Big Thompson flood, what I recall most of all is that's the day my son was born. Again, actually that day I was up in the National Park fishing.
There were dozens of those moments that were uplifting, sitting in the Joint Information Center and realizing the person next to you hadn't been home in 3 days, but they were still there helping people and not worrying about themselves at all. Every other phone call that we were getting in the call center in the beginning was an offer of support versus a call for help.
Starbucks got opened fairly quickly after the flood. I think they were open within 10 days. Every morning I would come, and outside of our door would be one of their big things of coffee, tin cups, cream, sugar.
During the rappel, I dropped our haul bag down Field's chimney. We had to rappel down that. I knocked a rock on poor Bill. He got a couple of stitches in his head. And it was a real epic. But I had a real new appreciation for Long's Peak.
So there's actually about 350 oral histories.
That's how I ended up here. I felt connected to this community. But you forget that. When you're in the day-to-day grind of life, you forget how much each of us individually and how all of us as a collective community have affected the lives of people, like I said, around the world. Many times we forget, if we don't collect it now, it's not going to be here tomorrow.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, perfect. So a little highlight from the oral history collection there, which is very fun. The last thing I want to show you, sorry, very quickly, is the newspaper collection. This is hosted through Colorado Historic Newspapers. There are about actually 600 or so titles on this platform from around the state of Colorado. We are one of the only villages, cities, towns, municipalities that has digitized as far into present as we have. Usually folks get stuck on some copyright issues. Luckily, the Trail Gazette turned over copyright, so we were able to digitize as far into the present as we have. So I'll do Wild Basin again, again, it's all keyword searchable. Oops, if I could spell, that would be helpful. And this will just give you an example. These are 5,000, almost 6,000 hits from Wild Basin. And of course you can narrow it down. Best mass first, we can say oldest first. And again, another rabbit hole. And you know, once you start looking at Wild Basin, and other names start kind of coming into those search terms, the fun is endless, really. Does anybody have any questions about museum resources and things like that? I'll wrap things up now, but for folks who are interested in local history, this is a real must see for sure. No questions? All right, amazing. Thank you all so much.
Great. Second. Let me just make sure I can see, make sure the online folks can actually see me. Give me 1 second. There we go. Right. Thank you, Mikaela. And I want to start by, again, thanking Alexandra for your generosity in flying all the way out here from LA to be with us. We really appreciate it. Thank you for being here and sharing. Mikaela, thank you for joining us tonight, and for the Estes Park Museum for partnering with us on this talk. I want to thank all of you for joining us and bringing your questions. And I want to thank the Friends of the Library Foundation for supporting everything we do. I will just mention one upcoming program, continuing our Colorado 150 offerings. We'll have Ethan Nightchild here on Monday evening to talk about Colorado ghost towns. I will email everyone who registered with a survey and a few links. Love it if you could fill out that survey. Let us know what you thought of the program. And have a great evening, everyone.